So now it's time to move towards the first talk. And the first talk is an invited talk. It will be given by Cornelia Auer. So she's a senior researcher at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Originally, she studied computer science in Passau in Germany. Then she did her PhD in data analysis and scientific visualization at the Free University in Berlin. After a few years in industry, she went back to academia, joining the Institute in Potsdam, where she is currently working in the area of communication and visualization of climate change scenarios. There she leads a couple of projects which are concerned with scientific communication and visualization. So today she will talk about providing scientific information about a house that is on fire. So very interesting title. And dear Connie, welcome. Please share your screen and the stage is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ingrid. Sorry, just had to find the right screen sharing because I'm sharing my entire screen because I would like to switch between the slides and my browser. Thanks for having me. I'm really very much looking forward to this day. But already the first event was super exciting and interesting. Just up front, I changed my title. It still has the subtitle, Providing Scientific Information About a House That Is on Fire, and that will also be with the talk an important topic. But when I went through my slides and when I did them, I realized that what I was mostly concerned with the last 4 years was really with the task to communicate for change. So being in a scientific environment that was used to kind of output their results in a continuous way, but there was little listening from policy and also from society for a long time, that had a certain mechanism that information was not provided in order to really induce change. And then this decisive moment came very luckily when I started my work at the Potsdam Institute, that Fridays for Future, emerging from Sweden actually, had a strong impact on society, but also on policy. And the main task that I really saw the last 4 years was to make communication and visualizations that really induce change. And that will be the guiding element of my talk. I will talk about visualizations, but I will also talk about stakeholder interaction and how to get the relevant questions from people that can then make change happen. But first, let me show you or give you a short introduction of what climate change scenarios are. Some of them, some of you might know them from these typical IPCC reports. And in general, scenarios are really important with respect to climate change because they help us to cope with uncertainty. We cannot predict climate change. That is one element that already induces an uncertainty, but we also cannot predict how politics or how society will behave and the decisions that will be made. And this is why we work with scenarios, which you can imagine as what if machines. What if society decided to become like really sustainable and to accept living lifestyles with less consumption and a very eco-friendly lifestyles, with respect to what if society continues as it does at the moment, or with a focus on Western societies, if they have high consumption lifestyles. Same for policy. Same for technological innovations. These are all pathways that we can't foresee, and that's why we work with scenarios, which then certainly already lets you guess that there is a lot of data to be communicated because we have these different pathways or projections, as we call them. And I was mostly concerned the last 4 years with scenarios about socioeconomic development, but also about energy and land use. But there are also scenarios that then show us how emissions would develop, how climate change would look like. I mean, these are the typical figures that you might know from the IPCC reports, and which impacts we would face. This could be water availability, but also damages, storms, extreme events, etc. So this is the circle that we have. And I already mentioned that there is a lot of data projections to be communicated. Another great challenge that they bring about is that there is a lot of uncertainty, not only because climate change is uncertain, but also because the models are just not yet ready to really project all factors and all influences of what will come about in a comprehensive and in a certain way. So there is also a challenge to communicate to the users, or to the users, what these scenarios can inform and what not. And then in general, because they have a long scientific tradition, they are considered as very complex from these agents of change, I would call them. That's our stakeholders or users. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, there is a huge amount of stakeholders that are now keen to use these scenarios because they want to do forward-looking analysis. So this is the challenge that we face at the Potsdam Institute at the moment. And just because I think this is also important for inducing change, I would like to give you a few basics about climate change communication. And I think many of them also overlap with general basics about communication. But it's really clear that positive narratives work better for communicating these climate change information than doom information, like really scaring information, because people will just turn off if it becomes too scary, let's say. And it's really important to inspire the vision of a better future there, a clean, efficient, or safe future. And one communication expert even said, if possible, don't even talk about climate. If you, for example, talk about the transformation in the transport sector, talk about green, clean cities with open space to meet and give a vision for that. And if not necessary, really leave out climate, because the doom has worn out. The problem is, since climate change is a slow onset event, or a apocalypse in slow motion, last time somebody said, the doom has really worn out, and it will not induce any reaction, or hardly any reaction, with stakeholders. And then one thing that we learned in the last 4 years also is people need help to learn what it is about. A lot is unknown. It is not that people are not interested in climate change or that they don't want to act, but there's just a lot of unknown information that is not there yet. So be patient with your stakeholders and provide them an entry to this complex information. Then at the Potsdam Institute, we are really dealing also with like high impact stakeholders like policymakers or like central bankers, people that have really high stakes when they do decisions. So it's a really strong tension between being positive, providing inspiring narratives, but at the same time being very concrete, being very transparent about the information that we provide, and to show all the background that is behind the output that we can produce in these scenarios. We also need to make people aware of what these scenarios are in, or what it has to do with their lives or their questions. So that's what we call also that we need to provide the contextualization, because the scenarios were produced also in a very scientific environment, and our stakeholders live in completely different universes. So it's also a matter of connecting the universes. What are these scenarios? What can they do? What can't they do? But also, how do they relate to the stakeholder questions? This connection needs to be there. And then, as I said before, it's really important for us to make the uncertainty apparent, but also that we don't get stuck in the many uncertainties we have, but then we also focus on the robustness that we have. This is something that we really started last year more strongly, where we say, but here we have robustness, we're working for robustness, and these are, for example, no regret options. So we really went into these corners where we can say, here we have a robust outcome. And what we believe now is that one strong pillar in order to induce change is that we really need to integrate our users and stakeholders in the production of our communication products. So we shouldn't guess what our stakeholders need, but ideally we ask them directly and connect our information to their questions. And we had the lucky circumstances that we could really invite our stakeholders, and we really put them in the center of the stage. They would speak most of the time when we discuss about producing communication products, and really collect their questions. And I mean, this is a figure I made, and it's so simple that sometimes I hardly dare to show it, but it is something that I often observe in science communication. And that would be like the typical way of stakeholder interaction in science, that there are users, they have questions, they formulate some questions towards us, then they also have implicit questions, and then there is the scientific information that is provided, and then there is some background knowledge. But because due to the lack of time and focus, maybe also, it often happens that science just communicates what they have available, but that they don't connect their communication, their answers, to the real user questions. So what typically happens is that there is something communicated, and then the user finds something that is communicated, but has to continue her or his search to the background knowledge in really to get their questions answered. And I mean, this is a very ideal figure, and it's really time consuming and everything, but this, in my view, would be the optimal communication, where we really drag background information that we have up to the front and really answer the user questions. And this is something that will guide what I will show later in a moment. With having this co-production approach, if possible, we believe it's really beneficial, because you get a good balance in what you communicate, but what you also get is the ownership of your stakeholders, because they are really integrated in the process. It becomes their product, ideally. And that is really rewarding, because then they will continue and promote your communication product. And from there, it will have its own evolution. And what is really important, it will become relevant. This is something that our stakeholders told us, that when we ask them what they wish for, they say, please become relevant for us. And it was exactly what I tried to describe before. It's like, don't communicate what you have, but communicate what we need, put it together. And this is really, relevance is one of the central aspects that seem so obvious, but are really hard to achieve. And then another aspect, which is really rewarding in doing co-production with stakeholders, is that you also get a validation of your data. Because if you look at your data from a different angle, you might see gaps or even errors that were overseen over a long time. And when you turn the angle, like it's like if you look at your data always from the same perspective, it looks consistent and everything. But if you look at it from a different perspective, maybe there are new aspects that have been overlooked for a long time, but which are really important. And just to give you a short inspiration, in case you have the chance to do a bit of stakeholder interaction and co-production, what we did, what was really rewarding, was that we developed user stereotypes with them. So before we started with the communication products, we just invited them to join groups and to define fictional characters of their user group that would represent what their needs and their questions. And we also allowed them that can be a stereotype or an extreme, but it opened up the stakeholders a lot, and they were super engaged in asking and in answering our questions of what the stereotype of their user would be. And for example, we drew this person first. And then we asked them, like, what would be the name and the age and the position of this stereotype user? And what are the interests and motivations of this user? And what would be the main source of information for your user? And how is success defined in the world of your user? And they came up with really very interesting personas. Like we had a policy group of policymakers, and they developed Gaia. Then we had a business group who developed Elon Musk, who was a strong innovator with short innovation cycles and everything. And then we had a finance group which developed Penny. And that really helped us also to see which information the users connect to and where we can start from. So it gave us the environment of the users and the interests and where they want to go to. Just here, 3 books that I can really highly recommend in case you want to do something like that. From Petra Kunkel. She's The Art of Leading Collectively, and she's also working a lot on giving people a feeling, an idea of future possibilities, of engagement, of collective intelligence. And if you address this in your exercises, then you will see how your stakeholders open up and how they catch fire for your project. And that was very much guiding our exercises with the stakeholders. And here's also a manual that I created with a colleague, which you can download for free, which is kind of the essence of these 2 books here. That's The Art of Co-Creation, is also an excellent book, but it's more with a focus on technological innovation and more for startups. But I would really recommend you to take a look at them if you have the chance. So that was the first part I wanted to talk about. If you want to induce change, it's really good to integrate your stakeholders and ask them what they need. And for us, there was quite some surprise because they told us, firstly, that there is a huge need to learn, actually, that they don't already need the perfect visualization tool that just shows them some very special aspects about, I don't know, technological innovation in hydrogen or something, but that they really need to first learn the basic concepts of of climate change scenarios. And then in a second step, they want to explore the details. So for us, we really learned that staged access to climate change data is really important in order to get everybody on track and to have modular tools that help stakeholders to grasp the information. And just like to put it into relation to what this day is about, because it's very much about storytelling and immersive communication and visualization. So today I'm a bit more like my talk is first the learn part would really very much relate to the presentations that we will see later. The explore part then that I will present might then be beneficial for you, hopefully, when you really tackle the individual elements that you might want to present in your storytelling exercises. So I'm a bit more into details, I'm afraid, but just to have it like the learn part would very much suit the topic of today, and the explore part maybe might be helpful for you to cover individual aspects. So now let's jump into the learn part. So storytelling, we really found out that this is really beneficial in order to convey the high level information, the main story, and also to somehow put the claim on something that we found out in our science. And I just want to quickly show you one example how we did this. Here we have, it's a German project where we talk about climate neutrality in Germany. And what we did was that we used this technology of storytelling, which is quite on vogue at the moment in order to do like online storytelling. Essentially what we do, I won't go in every detail. We tell the story of climate neutrality and what is required, but a bit further down, I think I need to speed up a bit further down, we show like the main pillars of climate neutrality. So the robustness of the entire story of becoming climate neutral in Germany. And the first pillar is to decarbonize electricity. So you would have our current requirement of electricity in Germany. And here you see how it is produced. And then people would learn, like this is 2020, how electricity until 2030 needs to become renewable, so solar, wind, hydrogen, etc. That would be the first robust step. And then the second robust step until 2045 is that we would need massive lots more of electricity. This is something that some people haven't grasped yet, that our future is really going to be electric. We need to go away from like liquids and gases and really need to go towards electricity. And the second big pillar is what I just said, like today we see this is industry, buildings and transport and how they use electricity or non-electricity. So we really simplified here. And again, we see this is the status quo in 2020. In 2030, there's already an increase of electricity, but in 2045, it's like really most of the energy is provided by electricity. And then we have a bit of hydrogen and a bit of green e-fuels in our system. And then the third big pillar is that of energy efficiency, where you see here like the energy production at the moment, and we clustered here in renewables and non-renewables or fossils. And then here the end uses again. And then we tell them that this is the status in 2020. Again, 2030, our system becomes more renewable. But in 2045, we have like massive lots of efficiency gains by directly using electric power. Like if you drive an electric car, then of course, or not, of course, but this car is much more efficient than driving a car with a combustion engine, which has a loss of 70% and more of the input energy. And like this, we really tell them the main story of becoming climate neutral, but we also try to kind of produce a bit of fascination for that this is possible. And of course, there is problems with electric cars and everything, but we wanted to give them an idea of what is possible at the horizon. And if I imagine if we have had more time, then it would have been fantastic to take this efficiency figure and associate it with reduced pollution. Also, combustion engines they have more pollution, and I don't know if you followed them. There's again some ships in, I think it was at the coast of Florida or somewhere, when they have hoveries and the oil spills into the ocean. So if we connect this efficiency image with the reduced pollution that is also associated, I think this can really generate a catchy narrative where people can gain some optimism from it. We had a discussion with some officers from the EU, and they also said, of course it is important for us that you tell us the detailed aspects about your scenarios, but in essence, we are so covered up with information. It's really important for us to get a narrative that is sticky in our head, that can produce a vision. And this is something that we tried here with this kind of storytelling. And of course, there are many other modes where you can even do more elaborate storytelling. It's just it's more a very science or fact-based way of storytelling. And now the exploration, that then should be the detailed information. And if the storytelling was the claim, then the exploration should be the proof. So if I show oh yeah, look here, there is this possibility, here is this future, then of course the exploration should give the proof by the data that this is really possible, or this is sound information. But of course, then we get into the complexities again of these scenarios. And this is why I would like to show you now how we feel we have succeeded to get a hold on the information. And one thing that was actually inspired very much by what Ingrid also told me about a talk that she saw, that the less colors you have in a visualization, the more helpful it is for a user that is near to the topic to grasp the essence. So I very much advocate to cluster information in order to address specific questions. And for me, ideally visualizations work like stamps. If I zoom out, I should still be able to grasp the essence of what I'm showing here. And this is the example of a project that we did with the International Consortium of Central Bankers, where they also needed to understand the story of decarbonization. And when I was thinking about how to communicate these massive lots of data to them, I took the inspiration from the Kaya identity, which is something where you look at the emissions that you have, but you can decompose it, like in a tautology, to the product of population that you have, and then how much GDP you can produce for this population, but how energy intensive this is, this GDP, and how dirty the energy is. So F would be the emissions per unit of energy that you produce. And when you focus on these, especially last two aspects, these are actually the levers in order to make economy climate neutral or to reduce emissions, which is like the energy needed, the total energy amount needed in an economy, and also the emissions in an economy. And what I tried here then was really to show how the total energy, this is only until 2050, so this will go down even further, how the total energy will go down, and it would still, the economy would still run. And then here show the emissions intensity by clustering the low or no emission technologies and the high emission technologies, which would be the fossils. And here is how our electricity needs to scale up. And I found this is really helpful in order to help them grasp the major points, like that we really need a lot more electricity, and that the fossils need to phase out like until 2030 in electricity production. Here, you see there's not so much change, but like to really show them the overall amounts and the change dynamic as such. And I think that was really helpful, because we needed to, they had to pick a model and a scenario as their lead model and scenario. So we needed to give them also the chance to compare all these scenarios and models together, and having these very, very simplified representations of these aspects, it helped them to grasp the differences. Whereas if we would have had one color per each element here, I think that would have been too much, and it would have been really hard for them to pick their model and their scenario. Another very successful example that is not from us, but that is from our world of data, of clustering information, is this here, where they just put together all emissions from energy. And this is also something that I hadn't seen before, or where I was really happy to finally see such a visualization, because it really shows how energy is the emitter and is the first place to go to if we want to become climate neutral. Another example, this is not so much visualization, it's more illustration, was the heated debate about hydrogen and how a future of hydrogen would be possible or not, because many think of these science fiction futures, and hydrogen is really attractive because in the end it would just decompose into water once you have it, and when you use it, water and air, so that would be fantastic. But it has to be produced, and it needs a lot of electricity to be produced. And then they made this hydrogen ladder, where they really just assessed every element where hydrogen would just be without alternative, because we cannot replace it by anything else. But then all those elements that would just be where it would just become too expensive to use them, to use hydrogen for them, were clustered up here. And that also brought a lot of clarity into the German debate on where hydrogen can be used and where not. And it probably destroyed a few visions or illusions, but I think like it's not the super attractive type of illustration, but it's super clear, and clustering and sorting and everything can be super helpful in order to help decision makers to go one step further. And here's another example where they also reduced data and clustered to the question. I'm currently also working with spatial data about climate impact. So where will yields go back, and where is food security will become an issue. And you can look a long time at the data, and then you finally find out that this will be the crisis belt. But I found that they really very nicely clustered the information, that here the models say this will really be the crisis belt, where we have strong yield reductions in food security issues, whereas the northern part, or like the very lower southern part, will not be as much affected. And I also think that this is really helpful, especially if you have spatial data and a lot of information. Then what we found, what is also very helpful, is to decompose information. I found that I think that naturally comes from having to publish papers where you're restricted to 8 pages. Then of course scientists start to put everything into one image, which is here. I like our scientists were super proud of that image because it shows everything. And I just thought like, no, that's the monster. Nobody will understand it if it's a stakeholder, if you want to induce change, because it's too much information. It's for a scientist, excellent, but for a stakeholder, not as much. And here they have like the producers of energy together, and here the consumers of energy. That would be the different sectors. And what we did now is really to take that apart and to make these sub-complex entry visualizations where you really give an overview. This would be electricity, how that would develop 2020, 2030, 2045, hydrogen, and then liquid fuels and gaseous fuels. And I found that really encouraging because I had the scientists looking at these figures and they said like, oh my God, I wasn't aware that we will have that little of e-fuels in 2045. It was really, when you have these clustered images, sometimes you really overlook details. And I found that really encouraging, having the scientists say, oh my God, I wasn't aware, by decomposing like the information to very simplified, reduced visualizations. And yeah, I think I have to speed up. This is a very famous example from Ed Hawkins, and probably most of you know it. He really did very minimalistic effort and just plotted the mean temperature per year. But it is so impressive to see how global warming is advancing. And another thing that we found very helpful and that I can only recommend is to recompile data. Not what I said before, not to use what is there already, but to take the user question and then recompile it. And this is one example I like really very much. It's more an illustration, not a visualization, but where we wanted to answer the question, like, who is producing more emissions? Is it like personal transport or is it freight? And there's a sub-question to it because personal transport is somehow, to some extent, also related to luxury, whereas freight would be considered as something that we need in order to have our supplies and to have the economy running, like from a conservative perspective. But this was also the sub-question, and the information was not there. And when we recompiled it, there was quite some surprise that, like, really personal transport, like, that you do just for meeting friends for a coffee and yeah, going shopping and stuff like that, produces that large amount of emissions, whereas our daily needs are nearly only half of the emissions. And yeah, you have to be aware that if you recompile data, this is the moment where it's very prone to finding errors in the data and where you need a good management with the scientists, how you deal with it, if they want to change and correct things, or if you need to show something else. And another example related to that is not only to recompile data, but also to recalculate data. And this is something that we like a lot because we, in this last project about the German climate neutrality, we also wanted to show how energy intensive the vision of hydrogen and green e-fuels is. This is something that was a really hot debate in Germany among politicians, whether we can just continue with the infrastructure that we have at the moment and use so-called green e-fuels then. Like, you would have a combustion engine and you could use it with e-fuels that are produced from renewable electricity. And in general, this sounds very tempting, but it would require 3 times as much electricity to be produced in Germany than we have now. And we had the feeling that the debate was not really clear on that. And that's why we produced this Sankey. I just quickly want to show you this, where we have different scenarios. Like, we have a mixed scenario that would go towards, a scenario where we have a lot of direct electrification, meaning electric cars, etc. But we could also have a future which would be hydrogen driven. So there would be a lot of political support for hydrogen, and there would be a future, another future for e-fuels. So this is the scenario idea that you look into different futures and different technology perspectives. And what we show here is the final use, like we would directly use that much amount of electricity in 2045, then we would use that much of hydrogen, and that would be liquid e-fuels, and that would be gaseous e-fuels. I hope that's not too much detail, but like this is what we would at the end use. And this here would be the required electricity production in order to produce these energy carriers in the end. And here in the mixed scenario, okay, we get a mixed picture, but if we look into a future where we focus very much on direct electrification, you can see that the need of input electricity becomes less because the end users are more efficient. And now I jump to the extreme. If we focus on an e-fuel future, then we really have a lot of more electricity demand, and especially here, this would be imports from foreign countries where it's not clear where it would come from. And that was a very political debate because Germany has a strong transport production, like in terms of cars, but also in terms of trucks. So there would be a great interest to continue this kind of production. But what we did here was really that we showed, and that went into policy advice, that how much more of renewable energy and electricity, especially, we would need to produce. And I think this was a real change maker because it made it so obvious that at the moment we have so much issues about where a windmill or solar panels would be. And then if we would need 3 times as much electricity that would be renewable, the question is really, where would it come from? Okay. And now I'm close to one other aspect is that it's also, I said before, it's important to show robustness and uncertainty. So what we did again was that we reduced and clustered data. And here we showed, for example, for transport, the need of energy, and that would be fossil energy, that would be e-fuels, that would be hydrogen, and that would be electricity for the 4 scenarios I was just showing you. And there you can really see that all 4 scenarios have a stable prediction of a lot of electrification and only smaller variations towards e-fuels and hydrogen is even more uncertain. So the idea was really to help policymakers to say, okay, what will be the future of hydrogen in the transport sector? And you see, like with the blue, the future of hydrogen is very uncertain, versus a little bit of e-fuels seems to be constant in all of these scenarios. So we can kind of adjust our policies, our funding, etc., towards a lot of electricity or direct electrification, but also towards a bit of e-fuels. And I'll skip that now. Just quickly want to touch illustration. So if scientific visualization as such is too complex, then we found out that illustrations can be super helpful. And what helped us a lot was then finally to say, okay, let's put up a matrix of the central qualities or components these scenarios have, and then vary them across the scenarios or potential other variations. And here you see like how the future develops, that there is a lot of hydrogen, electric cars, and how our demand of electricity will rise in the different time steps that we are looking at. Or this would be the visualized illustration of different approaches of a decentralized German energy supply or a centralized I think I won't explain that in detail, just want to show you this, where we had illustrations for transport futures, which really helped. Here we did some citizen deliberation, which really helped the citizens to also open up for different potential futures, and that the future is not just one follow-up narrative from the past that we had. And there was innovation, digitalization, transport future, where we have autonomous driving and self-driving trains. There was a future where there's not so much the belief in technological innovation, but that there would need to be like strong direction from the government with laws and stop signs. Then we had a scenario where cities and the rural areas would be well connected, and that there would be a lot of space and more public transport. And then we had a market scenario based on the CO2 price. And that was really surprising how well they discussed really complex topics with the inspiration, like the initial inspiration of these illustrations for the different scenarios. And I think I'll jump now directly to the outlook. Well, you just saw a tour de force through my experience in communicating climate change scenarios. I can only say that the communication and the exchange is extremely important to bring about the required change, because the stakeholders are living in different universes, and you cannot expect that they know too much already about the implications of climate change or the transformation required. So we really need to exchange and also learn from our stakeholders what is relevant. It is highly satisfying to become active and contribute to this, but it's also quite demanding, because the responsibility is really high when you communicate this information to stakeholders, and timeframes are very short. You always have the feeling there's a project and it's like a one-shot opportunity, and it needs to hit the bullseye in order to induce the required change in the organization that you're addressing or your users. But I believe that all kinds of inspirational work and strong narratives are very helpful. And what I also learned is that good communication can really nourish scientists, because they're working on the issue for a long time and looking at it from different perspectives, and like clustering the narratives that they have can really support them and vitalize their work. And this is really extremely rewarding. So thanks for your attention. Sorry for taking longer than expected. I'm happy to take questions if possible, but we can also postpone that to the discussion round later, as you prefer.
Thank you very much, Connie. So as you said, we do not have too much time, but I would at least give the possibility to ask some questions to the round. So I don't see anything in the chat already. So if there's somebody who wants to ask some question right now, just feel free to unmute and talk.
Yes, hi, Torbjörn Andersson from Linköping University. I was wondering, in these illustrations, there's like a time period from 2020 to 2045 or so forth. Is there, I was thinking that I might lack decision points. Is there something that you should?
You mean this illustration?
Yeah, like in the graphs, the time graphs. So I was just thinking that if you have it, when do you need to make these decisions in order to get the results? So I mean, if you postpone there will be a deadline for when you need to make decisions in order to get the results you want. So that's what I was wondering.
Yeah. So the setup of the models that produce these scenarios are not like there's this huge debate if these models really need to change, because they are not like agent based, which would be what you were talking about, but they are more equilibrium models. So you have a setup and you of an economy, of a society, etc. And then you say you want to optimize welfare for this economy, but you have to stay below 2 degrees. And then they do this optimization run, how society, economy can optimize welfare and stay below 2 degrees. And you kind of set up the initial parameters individually so that you get the different scenarios. What you're talking about would rather be an agent-based model where you really have agents, an iterative simulation, and not a perfect foresight simulation, where they can do changes. So this was also a great surprise to me that these models are coming from a totally different perspective, and that they just do an optimization and that they don't allow decision points. What we want to do, and what is an important work also before from the UN, is the gap report, so that they show certain moments in time and show like if like the current development, that you put it into contrast, that the current development would be like there would be a gap to the required development. But like this is not that you can optimally kind of pick different decisions at different times in space, because these models are rather complex, and this is also a very big drawback of the models, especially if you want to communicate to citizens, because they really want to play. You would like to have some gamification, and at the current setup, that is unfortunately not possible.
I was just thinking that, I mean, if you have a deadline that's 2045, that's too long ahead for people to understand that it's a problem or it's a need for change. But if you see that when you make the decisions, then when in time you make the decisions, then you will have different changes to the deadline, so to speak. So I was just thinking that.
So that is an excellent point. Yeah. The problem is really that all we can do is say the priorities for, let's say, 2030 are: you need to ramp up renewables from wind and solar to a factor of 4. But what they can't do is to say, if you don't ramp them up, like if you stay at the same level, then you will have that problem, because you have these optimization models. And then they would just ramp up something differently, or they would ramp up negative emissions to an unrealistic extent. So the requirement would really be that they would take their super complex models that really cover so many aspects. I guess I couldn't give you a glimpse of that, and simplify them very much again, in order to be able to capture that in such an agent-based model as you suggest, which would have the largest learning effect, I would imagine.